So while Diablo 4 is burning left and right, I took a really deep look at the patch notes. I had to look so deep for this video. I even saw some secret patterns within these texts of misery, but I wanted to see if there's a new build that can emerge as the result of these changes that is actually good in this depressing gloom. And I introduced to you my Double Curse Shadow Mancer Sever build. This build is pretty much like making your Necromancer a Shadow Mage with curses that essentially deals a ton of shadow damage. It clears very fast, but also in a very safe way, with nerfs to survivability all across the board. That is a nice trait to have for a build right now. So how this build works is as following. You quickly proc Blighted, Decay and Shadow Blight to start dealing insane damage to your enemies. Quickly said, these are 3 different effects that ramp up your damage output. It's as easy as that. And we're going to proc the effects of these 3 different effects really quickly through Blighted Corpse Explosion, which leaves these pools on the ground that deal shadow damage over time, and more importantly Blood Mist, which can automatically explode corpses with the aspect of Explosive Mist aspect, but you can also spec Blood Mist into having the ability to generate corpses. So it generates and simultaneously blows up corpses, which means the 3 earlier effects are really easily activated in this way, as the variety of damage sticks from these explosions and Blood Mist quickly builds up stacks. Then accordingly you use Double Curse for several benefits and finish off with Sever, which is your core skill for this build, which can and will in this setup crit for very high values, we're talking millions, and just melt enemies as you see right here. Why Double Curse then? Well, if you read the patch notes you will see that there are quite some buffs to curses. First of all, Iron Maiden got buffed through Abhorrent Iron Maiden, which means we heal now even more when we kill stuff with Iron Maiden. Amplify Damage also got a buff, which procs on cursed targets, but most importantly for a Double Curse build specifically, Aspect of the Damned also got a buff, which gives you a huge boost to your damage output on targets that have double curses applied on them. And it's a Codex of Power aspect, so pretty easy to get. Outside of that, we also get general benefits like Essence for cursing enemies, heal, slow or even stun, reduce damage to us, and most importantly a chance to reduce your active cooldowns. So you get a ton of utility, survivability and also damage output through Aspect of the Damned, running Double Curse, which is really nice for this build. Furthermore, Sever got a buff as well that helps out with single target damage mostly, and some other minor buffs that are also of importance for this build. But before we proceed, we need to talk about something very important. Bloodline Heroes of Lithis. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. Bloodline Heroes of Lithis is a RPG where you build your own kingdom and economy with strategic gameplay and use champions to defend your kingdom and the world. The game adds new fantasy characters for each gender with unique abilities every 2 weeks, so plenty of variety. For example, the just released Goatfolk Stone Throwers, who originated from the lands of the Dragonborn and became the finest marksmen after finding an ancient artifact of power in the ruins of a lost civilization. You can obtain new characters by summoning as well as breeding with companions and capturing prisoners, and you can customize all champions in the game by marrying any 2 bloodlines to create over 1000 fantasy hybrids, which means endless possibilities for your lineups and matchmaking strategies. The visuals of the game are also stunning, whether it's your character with unique appearances, skins, or just a realistic fantasy world. There's also then PvP, where all players can obtain uniquely designed hybrid champions by earning points in the seasonal guild wars. Download the game for free on both Android and iOS. Use my link in the description to do so, or scan the QR code on screen. If you use my link, you get a special starter pack worth $20 with the specified items on screen, and the first 30 players who leave their in-game account ID and username in the comment section below will also receive a free legendary Orc champion, Ugrul, one of the best warriors to carry you in the game. The ultimate combo for this build is then as following. Start off with Blood Mist, keep your eyes on your bar. When it says Blighted, that means you're done with the Blood Mist part and you have now procced Blighted to erase your enemies. Use Scorp Tendrils for CC to pull everything in one spot, and in that very moment while Tendrils is pulling stuff, you apply Double Curses on the ground to where all enemies will be pulled towards 2, and then you finally finish it off with Sever. Sever will melt everything really with all this damage amplification that you get from the various status effects that you have procced so far. To truly finish off the combo then, you also need to make sure to like this video and subscribe to me for more great content. You know how it works, no matter the game. And the build doesn't just get its damage through Sever, no, the Pulse of Blight and Blood Mist trigger corpse explosions and stuff like that as well, which will already start dealing good damage to your targets. And you don't have to pay attention to which curses you have applied or not, because you can just actually press both buttons that you have attached to your curses and your character will subsequently just cast both of them in succession. So that's a nice feature, and you don't have to pay attention to the order or something like that, just press both of them at once. The green one is Decrepify, while the red one is Iron Maiden. Like I also said, the build allows for a very safe way to clear, so it's also a good build for hardcore. As you see from my health bar, I pretty much instantly fill it up completely every time I erase stuff, thanks to various things in our kit that gives us health, and I don't have to use too many potions. And that also means that you can destroy enemies that are like 25 levels higher, as you see in this clip, with this build in a relatively safe manner. And I'm only level 76 right here, so that actually means that if you want to push higher nightmare tier dungeons, even when you're just leveling, you can absolutely do so. Versus bosses, the build has a funny interaction, as initially it starts slow because you have to proc Blighted first and get your damage going, but once it procs, yeah, you'll pretty much just erase any boss really quickly. So it's a bit of a unique way to actually kill bosses, which is kind of fun. It's definitely not like Bone Spear levels of quick boss clears, but definitely good enough for killing bosses. If you're interested in a Bone Spear leveling guide, by the way, make sure to also check my Bone Spear Necromancer guide. It's still very good after the nerfs, and really you barely notice any difference in a practical sense. S tier build still for sure. And it's also a leveling guide, so it guides you through the whole leveling process in the best and smoothest way that I could find. So definitely check that video out as well. But yeah, let's not digress too much. We're now focusing on this build. So for this build, let's get also into the gear, setup, skill tree, and all that good stuff. Starting off with gear. For gear, the most important stats that you want to get for sure are the plus ranks to sever on your gloves, defensive stats like total armor, damage reduction, and maximum life on your chest and pants, and then make sure to get as much vulnerable damage as well as crit chance and critical strike damage on your rings and weapons. Utility wise, you want cooldown reduction on your helm and movement speed on your amulet, so you can actually level faster, and essence cost reduction is also a really good utility based stat. The only unique for gear that I'm using are the Greaves of the Empty Tomb. I actually really like these boots. They provide you survivability, essence cost reduction, and also extra evade charges, but also have that cool aspect that makes our Sever deal shadow damage even when it's traveling, which means more damage output, but also an extra way to proc Blighted. If you can't get these boots to drop, then just running boots with these type of stats is also good. Just make sure to get that evade charges, and for your aspect, put on Wind Striker. So outside of our boots, let's go over our aspects really quick, or at least the aspects you want to work towards to, even if you're leveling. First of all, Explosive Mist is what I put on the helm. This is a really good aspect for this build because it will make it so that Blood Mist, every time we use it, will now in fact explode the corpses on the ground and make it have that corpse explosion effect essentially, which helps out tremendously with building up Shadow Blight and thus Blighted. Then on our chest I put Protector. This is a Codex of Power aspect, but it's really good because it gives us a barrier every time we damage an elite, and yeah, it helps out a lot with survivability. For gloves I put Decay. Decay is one of the 3 aspects that I started off the video with. Very important for this build, just makes it so that our damage output spirals out of control essentially. Then for pants I put Disobedience on it. Really nice survivability type of aspect and just makes you tanky essentially, and we hit so many things at all times, so we build it up really quickly as well. For the two-handed sword I put the most important aspect on it, which is Blighted. Definitely put it on your two-handed sword so you get that 100% extra bonus to it, and with that, just look at the description, the number will be insanely high. So the core premise of this build is really just to proc this aspect as soon as possible, and then we get a huge increase to our damage output. Then for the amulet I put Grasping Veins on it. We will use corpse centers all the time with this build, so getting a nice critical strike chance and critical strike damage boost to our build is really good, and putting it on the amulet gives us a 50% bonus as well to those stats. For the rings I put Damned on the first one. Damned is a major aspect for this build as we run 2 curses, and as you see, this is the Codex of Power variation because I have 40%, but it can go all the way up to 50% if you get a Damned aspect from the wild essentially, extracted from a random legendary, and if you get it all the way to 50%, your damage output will be even better. Then for the other ring I put Blood Soaked on it. Blood Soaked helps out tremendously as well with building up Shadow Blight and Blighted, because our Blood Mist will now also leave a trail on the ground that lasts for 4 seconds, and that trail will deal shadow damage per second to all the enemies that are standing in it, so this helps out tremendously with proccing that Shadow Blight key passive, which in turn will help out tremendously with proccing Blighted. So for the Paragon boards, this is mostly intended as a leveling guide, so this is not a level 100 all optimized Paragon board, but this is a nice Paragon board setup to get you started. First of all, I start off with Sacrificial as our glyph for the first board. Sacrificial just gives us a nice boost to our damage output when we have no active minions, and we're going to sacrifice our minions for this build. For the second board, you have to go Wither. It's the best board for any shadow damage oriented necro build. It contains a ton of these shadow damage amplifying nodes, so it's really a no-brainer, and you want to get it as soon as possible. The legendary node itself is not mandatory in my opinion, however. For the glyph, I take Control, considering we will slow and stun our enemies all the time through Corpse Tendrils and Decrepify, which means we will utilize the nice damage increase from this glyph pretty much all the time. For the third board, go for Flesh Eater. We will consume corpses all the time as well with Blood Mist and Explosive Mist, so we get that 40% increased damage for 6 seconds every time we do so. And then for the glyph, I went with Darkness. I need one more point to activate its additional bonus, but Darkness is nice because it gives us a bunch of extra shadow damage essentially, as well as some tankiness and survivability through the additional bonus, because everything that is affected by our shadow damage will now also deal reduced damage damage to us. For sacrifices for this build, first sacrifice is going to be Reapers. We will deal increased shadow damage through sacrificing our Reapers. Second board is going to be the Cold Mages. If we sacrifice those, we will deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. And then for the Golems, we will sacrifice Iron Golems, which in turn will give us a bunch of extra critical strike damage. For the skill tree, I will show you which talents you want to get and in which order, so you can use this as a leveling strategy. Starting off with the basic attack, you can take whichever you want really. It's only going to be relevant for very early on. As you saw on my hotbar, I don't actually use a basic attack for this build. However, very early on, a basic attack can be nice as a generator to get some essence. So for example, take Reap and get 2 points in it. Then we can go ahead and get our core skill Sever, spec it into Paranormal Sever, put 1 more point in it, and we will unlock the next 3. Get Corpse Explosion into Blood Mist and get Grim Harvest for that essence regeneration. Now we can get both our curses, get Iron Maiden's second passive, so it will give us more essence regeneration basically. Then go back, max out Sever. This will in turn lead to you unlocking this tree, so we can now get Corpse Tendrils into Enhanced Corpse Tendrils into Plagued Corpse Tendrils, so enemies are made vulnerable every time we use it. This is a huge power spike early on, so get that thing. Then we go back, take 3 points in fueled by that, so we get that nice increased damage every time we use our Corpse Explosion. We also get Enhanced Corpse Explosion into Blighted Corpse Explosion. Blighted Corpse Explosion will make it so that every time we use Corpse Explosion, it will leave that pool of shadow damage on the ground that takes damage over time on our enemies, so that is just a nice extra source of damage early on. Then we go back to our curses, get Abhorrent Iron Maiden. We also want to get Hued Flash, 3 points into Unliving Energy and Imperfectly Balanced for extra damage and some essence. Now at this point in time we will also unlock our key passive, so we go with Shadow Blight. Obviously this is one of the most important things for this build, so the moment you unlock your key passive is really the moment you also want to get it. Then we go to these nodes, get them as well. Reaper's Pursuit helps out with movement speed, get 3 points into Gloom and 3 points into Terror. 3 points into Standalone and 3 points into Memento Mori. Both of these will help out with our survivability through Standalone, and Memento Mori will help us out with increasing our sacrifice bonuses, which are essentially all damage oriented sacrifices like vulnerable damage, shadow damage and critical strike damage, so that helps out tremendously with our damage output. Then we go back to right here, we get amplified damage, we run double curses, so only makes sense to get this talent, which helps again out tremendously with increasing our damage output. For Decrepify, we now also get Enhanced Decrepify and Abhorrent Decrepify. You can get these talents earlier as well, by the way, if you want to, but they are lucky hit based, so you might not proc them that much if you're like only level 30, level 40. Then you want to get 3 points into Death's Embrace, and then you also just put 1 point into Death's Reach. You can in fact actually kill enemies from a big distance with this build through Sever, but it's not that important because usually when you use Blood Mist and you are setting up the combo, you will be quite close to your enemies. That's why I only just put 1 point in it, and then put the 2 final points into Enhanced Blood Mist and Ghastly Blood Mist. At this point in time you will have seen probably the Explosive Mist aspect at least once, so it's good to get those passives as well to get your full build going. And then the skill tree will look like this. If you want to make use of the Malignant Hearts as part of the season's new mechanic, Decrepit can be really nice as it just applies one of our curses automatically when there are enough enemies around us. But even better is the Sacrilegious one. This thing will add a lot of power to this build. Automatic Corpse Explosion means faster Shadow Blight passive procs and thus faster Blighted procs, and it also just means more damage overall without you having to do anything. So it's a really good heart for this build. And this video was without these hearts, by the way, and you already saw the power of the build, but as you can imagine, using something like Sacrilegious is going to make the build even better, so definitely try it out for yourself. And that was everything you need to know to play as my Double Curse Shadow Shadowmancer. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments.